24. Joyce sat in the common area of Karen's inn, idly nibbling on a bit of dried cheese while she wrote out a detailed update report to send back to her resistance cell. The work she had hoped to accomplish wasn't going nearly as well as she'd hoped, and she was getting impatient with how long it was taking Garana to get the information she needed. Still, it wasn't all bad, coming here, she thought, since it had given her a chance to check in on the two Naasquat children that had wandered so innocently into her store. Knowing what she did of their purpose here in Sasquatch, she couldn't help but feel so despondent over the seeming impossibility of the task before them. While resistance groups had spent years slowing down Zagos's operations, with only nominal success, those two had made incredible headway in disturbing the tyrant's plans, and were on their way to destroy his greatest achievement before it was used to crush all remaining resistance on the planet. Part of her felt like the work of the resistance was almost pathetic in comparison, but she knew that wasn't true. There was no way the two spiritualist prodigies could be everywhere at once, and moreover, the resistance and Daphne had been working behind the scenes to keep the worst of Zagos's mobile strike teams from being able to track the children down now. After the Helm Temple and Kenshudo, that had been especially difficult to do. Still, she considered after this assignment was complete asking for leave to accompany them. Things were coming to a head here in Sasquatch, and so many pieces were moving on the board. She wanted dearly to make sure the children got to where they needed to be when the time was right. Her thoughts were interrupted when the door to the inn was opened and the two children practically collapsed through the opening. Dropping everything, Joyce was on her feet and rushing to them in the space of heartbeat.
"Oh, great ones! What happened?"
she said, fretting about them. Both were absolutely filthy with dirt and dust and ash and dried blood. Their armors were pitted and dented and stained and burnt. It was unclear who was propping up who, as they both leaned against each other for support.
"Oh, never mind. That doesn't matter. Garana! Help me carry them,"
she shouted over her shoulder, taking Medea in her arms. Chetsney leaned against a wall, until the burly Garana scooped him up as well. Both were carried to beds and laid upon them.
"Go and get me some hot water and towels. And fresh drinking water too. And food,"
she ordered. Grumbling, Garana set off to fetch the things she had requested, and she was left alone with the two. Carefully, she removed their armor and checked their bodies for wounds. She sighed in relief to find that whatever wounds they had sustained were now healed, but it was still clear the two were half dead purely from physical exhaustion. When Garana had deposited the things, she set about cleaning them up, making requests for towels to be rinsed or wrung out. She cleaned them up as best she could, and when they had rested long enough to be able to converse, she propped them up with extra pillows and fed them some water and light food.
"Thanks, Joyce,"
Chetsney managed weakly.
"You didn't have to do all this." "Don't be daft, you silly boy. Of course I'm going to help you if I see you like that,"
Joyce replied, then turned to bark another order at Garana. To her surprise, nobody else was in the room.
"What the? Where did Garana go?"
With a croaking voice, Medea said,
"He left after he dropped off the food and things."
Joyce's face screwed up in confusion.
"What? But he was just here helping me with the towels."
Chetsney and Medea shared a look across the room.
"Oh, right. She can't see him,"
she said.
"Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but one of those ghosts we've talked about has been helping you. Bean, wave something around so she can see."
Joyce turned in confusion, which turned to shock, as one of the towels dunked into the basin of hot water, and then wrung itself out. She could vaguely hear something impossibly distant that sounded like whispers, but she couldn't make out what they were. An incoherent babble of words fell out of her mouth in response to seeing the impossible made real. Eventually, she managed,
"Ghosts are real." "Surprise,"
Chetsney said weakly. He even tried to move his hands in a showy way. Backing away from the bowl and towels, she said,
"You two better tell me everything, I think."
Though they were still weak, they explained in turns what they had been doing for Garana, and why. how the spirits of this land were falling under Zagos's sway, how Garana had found out a way to stop the plan, and them journeying to the tower to retrieve what was necessary, and the spectral warrior they had picked up along the way that had saved their lives time and again, is this cursed country. When they had at last finished, Joyce struggled to find what to say.
Well, my eyes do not lie. I saw the tower moving, and I believe you, of course. It's just a lot to take in. To think that Zagos would even go so far as to raise an undead army, though I must admit that it surprises even me, and I have witnessed a lot in my time in the Resistance.
She looked at them both, deadly weary and pale on the beds, with sorrow at the awful things they had to endure.
You two really are amazing. Is there anything I can even do for you? Could you fetch Garana for us? We need to get the seeds to him. Of course,
she said, and left them. Moments later, the gargantuan Fior man stomped into the room, and sat down, with Joyce hovering nearby.
So, how did it go?
He asked, simply, looking between them. Chesney bit back a sarcastic reply, dug the bag of seeds out of his armor, and opened the bag. It was the first time he saw them saw. They were white like opal gemstones, or cloudy glass, in the shape of seeds. They glowed dimly pale whitish blue, slowly pulsing. In his hands, he put them back in the bag, and offered it toward the Resistance leader. Midia, however, didn't hold back, and colorfully described her strong feelings on her experience. Garana ignored the biting remarks and sour looks, and looked the seeds over with awe. His wide, dark, watery eyes reflected the glowing seeds like an evening sky filled with stars.
Ah, yes, these are them. Wonderful, wonderful work. I dare say, none but you two could have done it. 10,000 long cold years, these seeds have been in that tower, guarded by the dead and damned.
He seemed to regain himself after a moment, cleared his throat, and tucked the seeds away.
Yes, well done indeed. All right, finally, with these, I can dispel those specters. It will take some time to prepare, so we will need to begin the ceremony tomorrow.
He looked at the children and gave them a sympathetic look.
You two have earned your rest. Stay as long as you need. I'll have some food and a hot water bath prepared for you. Joyce, though, I was wondering if I could speak to you a moment outside. I could use some assistance tonight.
Joyce nodded eagerly.
Oh, certainly. I'll help any way I can. Only...
She turned to the children.
Only, before I do, is there anything else I can do for you two?
Tiredly, the children looked at each other. There was a wordless plea in Midia's eyes which Chesney instantly understood.
No, I think we just need some time. Thank you, Joyce, really, and good luck, Garana.
They were left alone. Beanin excused himself, saying he would keep an eye out about town and check on them soon. The silence of the room dragged on, with the light of late afternoon just weakly turning the room a wan yellow. All Chesney wanted to do was close his eyes and fall into oblivion, but each time he did, all that could see was the huge dark mouth opening wider and wider for him, waiting to swallow him up. When he had faced the Terror Rex, and saw the great jaws enveloping him, there had been something like peace in his heart. Midia and Wild were safe, and he'd given everything he had. For just that moment, he felt he could accept it. This time, though, it had been different. Terribly different. Somehow, he knew, inside that black void was no peace, but eternal pain, endless despair, and the agony of his soul as it felt his doom approaching with nothing he could do to avert his fate. The fear grew in him then, real and raw, that made him feel like he was in over his head and things would only get worse, that he would fail in his journey and die in some hole somewhere, and soon. The feeling gripped his heart, and it took everything he had left to hold back the tide of tears that were building in his eyes. He grit his teeth, not allowing a quiet sob to pass through his lips or twist his face. That was until he heard the first hiccuping sound from Midia, across the room, and the grieving, quiet, involuntary sounds that came after. That connection of experience and pain couldn't be ignored, and it was the final crack in the dam. He had tried to stop his emotions with it. It all came out in desperate, pained growl that turned into a despairing cry of his own that was just impossible to stop anymore. They cried there, alone, together, for a long while, in their own private and shared pain. When the distance between them at last felt so anathema, they got up from their beds and held each other, and cried into the other's shoulders, desperate to not feel so alone and scared for their lives and their future, and finding what solace they could in sharing that burden with the one they loved. There were no words. There was no point. There was no way words could convey the complex storm of emotions they were both enduring, but they weren't even needed. In every strained sob, teary glance, and trembling grip, so much more was passed between them. There was no one else in the world they could share their pain with then, no other that could truly understand. It had all been too much. Far, far too much, and at last it was impossible to ignore just how much they felt like foolish children in the middle of a terrible war. Being a hero wasn't like it was in the stories. It was an aching body that felt like would never fully heal. It was always being out of breath. It was feeling completely spent with nothing left to give, and your enemies right in front of you. It was pressure, and pain, and hurt, and terror, loneliness, and weakness, and desperation. Both of course knew that tomorrow they would have to put it all aside again, fake their smiles, fake their confidence, shoulder the weight of their burden with broken bodies and weary hearts, and walk toward even greater death and danger. But today, tonight, they would be weak. When the long, somber hours of their grief and solace were at last elapsed, their hearts still raw but empty, they took meager meals, bathed, and fell into dreamless slumber almost before their heads hit their pillows. It has long been said that there is no rest for the wicked, yet neither is there rest for the innocent.
Wake, wake, little Nasquat children. There is great evil at work.
Both children jumped up in their beds like a shot. The room was steeped in darkness, save a bright red light from the window that bisected it. Bean was there, standing in the odd light, it making him seem steeped in crimson blood. His eyes were wide and alert.
What's wrong?
Midia asked, stammering from her disused voice.
Too much to explain. Arm yourselves, and come. Your friend is in awful danger.
That roused them. They scrambled their weary bodies into their equipment, and followed the warrior outside. The sky was red, and the land below steeped in shadow.
It's like that nightmare world the Headless drew us into,
Chetsney said, looking all about for one of the things to show itself. None did, but they heard a great tumult of voices off in the distance closer to the center of town. And behind it all, a woman screaming. In sudden realization, the pair of them locked eyes.
Joyce! Hurry!
Midia cried, and started running in the direction of the noise. The landscape was surreal. The ground, houses, anything solid was now just stepped in shadow and indistinct, and the sky, like a boiling sea of impossibly red clouds, in some great enormous spiraling whirlpool. Here and there they ran past shining figures, specters on their knees, reveling, praying, shouting in joy. Both knew there was only one place this could be coming from, the one place they'd been warned about by the rat-gorn in the bar. The ritual site at the center of the town. When they turned the final corner, the sight stopped them cold. Surrounding the raised, walled-off ritual site was a score of glowing, vibrant souls all praying towards the center. Joyce was in the very center of it, her hands nailed to a Y-shaped scaffold, holding her up. Some strange spectral aura was engulfing her like a bonfire, and she writhed within it. The flames rose high, and split up and away and seemed to be feeding the surrounding ghosts. And standing right next to her, in dark robes, was a cackling Urana.
Yes, yes, feed on her life, be reborn once more in immortal bodies, and serve our great Lord Zagos.
He laughed. It was manic and intense laughter, the kind that could only come from the truly mad. His eyes were wide and filled with delight as he watched his captive cry and buckle and writhe.
Oh, gods. Joyce, no.
Medea gasped, paling at the sight of their friend being tortured before them.
Let her go.
Chesney shouted, voice breaking in horror. The gargantuan Fiorella man saw the group's arrival, and all the specters turned to face them at the same time. The effect was chilling, so many dead, empty eyes staring them down.
Ah, my sweet, foolish children. You decided to join us. You shouldn't be up past your bedtime,
he shouted, and almost fell backwards when he erupted into raucous laughter. Medea couldn't believe what she was seeing. There was no way this could be reality. Every passing second her eyes refused to process the scene before her. She wished, desperately, to wake from this nightmare.
You're insane. What folly,
Bean whispered, shaking his head.
They've all gone completely mad. They have lost all that they once were, all for vengeance.
That seemed to get Garana's attention, and his face darkened.
Insane? Madness? Hardly. Whose plan was it to kill and impersonate the resistance leader in Karen? Mine. To raise an undead army and trick you all into helping me gather the glow seed I needed. Mine. I, alone, have succeeded where so many have failed. I, alone, will be exalted by the great Lord when I show him all I have done. I will be his right hand, his greatest general, and with this immortal undead army, I will crush those Nazquat fools. But first,
he began to giggle and dance with glee.
But first, they will destroy you.
He eyed them with avarice, his dark eyes boring into them.
Your sweet, soft little bodies, your juicy little lives, I'll burn them all up to make an army of immortal soldiers for my lord.
Filled with revulsion at the way Garana was looking at them, Chesney yelled so loud his voice was hoarse.
This is unforgivable. Stop this, now. Stop this or I.
He almost cried, forced to watch as Joyce's moans grew weaker, and more of her life was stolen away in the ritual, sagging painfully against her impaled hands.
Hee. Or you'll what, little boy? How do you kill what is already dead? With these soldiers, I am invincible. I'll drain this traitor of every last drop, and then your little poppet. I'll make you watch before I drain you too. Ah ha. Oh gods.
Medea was nauseous at the thought of the awful man doing to her what was already happening to Joyce. This was beyond forgiveness. This was beyond reason. Garana wasn't a person. He was like some kind of monster in the shape of a person.
Joyce, hold on. We're coming. Bring her to me. Bring the boy down. Destroy the traitorous spectre. Go, my servants. Fly. Ah ha.
Chesney couldn't hold back his tears as he saw Joyce look out at them with a mixture of shame and hope, despair, and unbearable pain. It was wind all over again, only she was dying right before his eyes.
I'll kill you. I'll kill you.
Chesney yelled, and in his hands grew a ball of sparking light that he held above his head. The clouds above started to flash and thunder, and the town was bathed in intense flashes of light and shadow.
Chesney, no. You'll hit her,
Medea yelled, grabbing his arm and shaking him, trying to stop him before it was too late.
We can't use that.
Screaming in incoherent rage, Chesney stopped the spell and forced the energy back into himself. The unreleased surge served to fuel his rage even more, and his body felt like it was on fire, like it needed to move, to fight, to do anything, or he would explode.
You're dead, Garana.
He dashed forwards, blind to everything but his unquenchable hatred for the man before him. He had witnessed cruelty, heartlessness. He had witnessed disgusting inhumanity. But here, right now in front of him, he had at last seen evil. And every beating of that black heart was another insult to everything on this planet. An insult he would not suffer. His scream of rage was joined by his companions, and they were side by side with him in this fight. 4 uncannily tall spectral forms, cloaked in darkness and radiating power, screeched at them and grabbed at them with monstrously large clawed hands. All at once, Chesney cut down the first in a single leaping overhead slash, while a deafening bolt of lightning evaporated the next, and Bean's sword danced through the last two like a red streamer.
"I'll kill you! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!"
Nothing stopped Chesney's momentum. Claws and strange emanations assaulted him from every direction, opening his flesh and tearing at things beneath, but it was like Cormu's sword pulled him along. Beyond feeling right in his hands, beyond being in sync, he felt truly one with the sword, and together they thirsted for blood and vengeance and death. Medea was no less an avatar of revenge than her partner. There were times where she had cursed her own connection to the Great Ones. But here, and now, she was glad for it, glad to be their advent, or avatar, or reincarnation. She would use the terrible power at her fingertips to erase this disgusting man from the face of Lennis, and crow it to the heavens that she would be the hand of Sophie bringing judgment on this unforgivable, evil monster. There were no curses, no words worthy of her hate. Her eyes blazed with power as she shoved every ounce of her life force she could ram into every bolt. Nothing that moved could even get close enough to touch her before she vaporized them. She was no longer a Lifery, or Regan, or mortal being. She was a thing of light, and justice, and power. Joyce had been the one ray of hope in an otherwise bleak, joyless land of racist hatred. Every sweet memory of her smiling face was being poisoned and replaced now, replaced with a grimace of tortured pain, and her life drained bit by bit. In between them both, a shadow danced and leapt and dashed, full of life and purpose once more. A shining blade turned red from the sky's light, cutting a path through them all. For too long Bean had been blind to how far the others had fallen. He would stop them. He would put them to rest at last, the rest they all deserved. No more, and never again. There were those who waited for him, yet that would weep for him if he allowed such as this to pass. Two shadowy forms swarmed over Chesney, clawing over his armor and sliding sharp spectral talons in the seams under his helmet. He flicked Cormu's sword in his hand and drove it mercilessly down into the first, carrying it to the ground and tearing through it until it at last dissolved in black flames. The other was blasted into tiny motes by Medea, though the lapse in her own defenses was enough to leave her vulnerable. 4 razor-sharp claws pierced through her shoulder and erupted through the front. Almost blind to the pain, she used the now stuck appendage to attack her opponent, filled her own body with light's electric power. She held the strength of it until at last the ghastly thing howled and disappeared, and her shoulder's gaping wound was left hollow. The arm was almost useless, and so she switched her staff to the other hand, moved forward, and pumped the crown's healing energy into herself, working at the edges of the holes and filling them in as she fought. Bean's sword was at last caught by the spectral blade of another wraith, a familiar one, to him.
"Ah, so you too have fallen to this madness, old friend. You could not best me in life, and you shan't in death. Have at you."
The other ghosts gave them a wide berth as 2 swords, of black and red, clashed in lightning-quick blows. Bean had no choice but to let the 2 Nasquat children outpace him. His old foe would prove to be a deadly distraction to the awful work those 2 had left to do, and he would see to it they would not suffer it.
"Ancient, blind fools! You've all lost sight of your true anger, your true purpose. I will never be defeated by those with such weak wills."
Chesney was still dead set on Garana, barely registering the foes before him as he struck them down with every step, heedless of the wounds they struck on him.
"Your spirits can't save you from me, Garana! Nothing can."
Far from being frightened, the vicious Zagos spy instead seemed to relish the young boy's hate.
"You think you can? You can stop the great Garana. Show me, then. I'll see you broken before me, and begging. Begging!"
Medea leveled a blast over the crowd, aiming right for the smug face of the man, but a spirit flew in the way before it could land.
"You're disgusting, Garana. No death is too ignoble for you. You will fall, and die forgotten. I'll savor your screams most of all, little witch. I'll shatter you like a porcelain doll."
The remaining ghouls barred their path in a dense wall of unnaturally tall spectral forms, glowing with the power of life stolen from their dear friend. As one, they all opened unsettlingly vast mouths, and let loose a deep, resonant howl of discordant chaos. It pressed them both back, cut their skin like knives, and filled their minds with overwhelming emotions that overpowered their senses. Even more than that, it seemed to penetrate and pass right through them, gnawing hungrily in places that should never be touched. The howl did not stop. The great force only grew stronger and stronger, with no end in sight. They stood there, barely enduring the onslaught, unable to move closer, forced to watch as ever more of Joyce's life fueled their enemies. Chesney grabbed Midia's hand, braced, and pushed his other hand out towards the throng.
Let's show them who they're dealing with, once and for all.
She gripped him right back, and mirrored him.
Together, we're unstoppable.
It was hard to concentrate under the onslaught. Their bodies suffering more and more cuts every second. The required focus, so easy before, was elusive. Instead, they relied on sheer power and will, shoving every ounce of themselves into whatever flickering shadow of the spirits they could feel, and prayed that they would do their will. A sputtering gout of flame, and short, impotent arcs of lighting erupted, barely holding their forms against the torrential force winds and otherworldly assault. Their feet slid back, inch by inch, but they remained upright. Two cold but sure hands pressed to their back. The push stopped their reverse momentum, then, slowly, inched them back forwards.
Come, Nasquat children. Together, let us bring them ruin and release.
The pair grit their teeth, and focused all their hate into their attack. They did not stagger, or relent, but poured more of themselves into the magic, doing everything to push back the incredible force. Then, at last, their efforts bore fruit. The flames stopped sputtering, held firm. The bolts grew thick and hungry. The pressure on their bodies abated just a bit, and with every inch it gave, their focus and strength doubled in turn. The flames turned blue, then white, and roared forward, mingling with the storm of thunderously strong bolts. The power of the whale fell back and concentrated, and like a bow shock, the flames and bolts wrapped around them, almost connecting, but just barely held at bay.
One last push. Give it everything.
Chesney yelled, and in response Midia could only offer a guttural scream as she delved deep inside herself. Together, they pushed past the limit of their own safety, beyond the terror of death, and in the next instant their twin forces burst through the line like a tidal wave, and all were at last blown away like so much sand in the wind. Before any of them could revel in their victory, or even sigh in relief, Garana was there, his two enormous fists like battering rams soaring through the night and right at Midia. So fast that there was no way it was just from his own natural strength. The hulking Fiorla drove a brutal fist into Midia's gut. It felt like his fist touched her spine, and in the next instant his other fist connected with her face and almost snapped her neck from the force. She was driven ground like a lead weight. Before Chesney could even register what just happened, Garana crouched and delivered a vicious uppercut to him next, literally launching him into the air, followed by double-fisted smash downward. Bean answered the brutal assault with one of his own, scoring a deep gash in Garana's shoulder right beside his neck. But the man was so bulky it hardly seemed to faze him.
Come on, come on, come on. It can't be over already. I want to hear your bones snap in my hands. I want to hear you scream as I nail you down.
He laughed, high and mad, his eyes hungry for them to stand so he could beat them down once again. Bean was, once more, their savior. He pressed his attack, to give the pair of them more time to get up. Wielding his arms like meat clubs, Garana had no qualms taking minor cuts just to swat away Bean's sword strikes. It cost Bean a blow that made him flicker, but he remained steadfast. Midia was on her feet, barely. Her organs felt like mush, but that gave her an idea.
Let's see how you like feeling weak and helpless,
she yelled, and a strange force whipped away from her and into him. The very bonds of his particulate matter were wrenched and teased out of place, severely weakening his defenses. In response, Garana landed another solid punch to Bean to swat him out of the way, and was about to dash over to Medea to unleash another barrage on her, when he spotted Chesney kneeling and fiddling with the bottle on his belt.
Oh, no you don't.
He turned on a dime and made straight for him. 1, 2, 3 quaking blows pummeled him like his armor wasn't even there. Chesney didn't get up, or stir, or move at all.
I told you, boy. I told you.
He danced and crowed his victory, but his laughter was short-lived. A blistering bolt of light clocked him in the side of the head, barely missing the temple by inches. The towering man howled in pain, stumbled, and fell over, clutching at his face. Medea's heart leapt in deep satisfaction at shutting the madman up for a moment, but it was no time to celebrate. She dashed to Chesney, and cursed that she didn't have her own bottle of ibuprofen. The bomb still latched to her belt. There was no time to fumble for Chesney's, either. This close, she could hear the barest hint of his groans. He was still holding on. She pressed her hands to his flesh and gave him the best jolt of life she could. He woke up screaming in pain as fractured bones reckoned themselves.
You little bitch! Don't you dare fix my toys when I haven't finished breaking them!
Garana yelled, though it sounded odd. The flesh on one side of his face was burnt clean away, leaving a gaping hole in the cheek. In a flash, she had sudden clarity. Chesney wasn't well enough to move on his own, to stand or run, or even roll over and try for his bottle. She could help him once more, which would be enough, but it would leave her open to attack. Bean was just there to the side, getting to his feet from being swatted away, flickering dangerously into dim shadows. She could go on the offensive and try to keep Garana's attention, hoping that Chesney could heal himself in time. Or she could call on Bean to sacrifice himself for that one extra moment she needed. Bean had said that it was likely another death blow would erase him from this world altogether. Someone falling in battle was one thing. But could she actually be considering ordering someone to sacrifice themselves, just for a strategic advantage? As awful as she felt even considering it, if she had to choose between Chesney, herself, and any other companion alive or undead. No, even between herself and Chesney. She would pick Chesney every time. She would bear the weight of that, always, over and over again, if necessary.
Bean, please.
She didn't need to explain. He knew. He understood. He would. With a truly vile grin, Garana marched towards her, his avaricious stare sending shivers down her spine. The next moment, Bean's antique but exceptionally sharp blade was driven deep down into the flesh beside Garana's collarbone. Enraged, Garana turned and swatted the spectre away, stomped on him, wrenched the sword free, and drove it through the old man and into the ground below. Bean's form collapsed into a pool of clumpy shadows, fuzzy and incorporeal. The attack had given her the time she needed. She gave Chesney another shot of the crown's magic, and he was finally aware enough to roll over, pull out a pill, and eat it. The rush of healing energy was like being able to breathe after a lifetime of suffocation. Barely recovered from the grueling battles of the tower, half-starved and bone-weary, they had then fought an army of undead, drained themselves to their limit, and then were immediately confronted by this horrendously powerful foe, without rest, or the chance to heal. Now, at last, he could fight again. Now, he could bring his true strength to bear. With a white-knuckled fist, Chesney charged at Garana and punched him in the gut.
Break!
The condescending smile of Garana was quickly replaced with surprise as the combined force of the punch, the spell, and his weakened defenses almost doubled him over. Chesney wished desperately that he'd had the strength up and speed up spells too, but this was still incredibly satisfying.
I'm going to take you apart. Not if I get you first,
he yelled, and with amazing speed he grabbed Chesney by the throat and pummeled him twice, before throwing him like a sack of grain at Medea. Medea had taken the time to give herself a bit of healing, too. The effect of the crown was so minimal now in comparison to their other medicines, but with this at least she felt like she could fight. The surprise launch of Chesney caught her so completely off guard, though, that he knocked her to the ground and they fell together in jumbled heap. She used their close proximity to push the strength spell into his body, and whispered,
"Kill him. You can do it." "I know. I will."
He easily pushed her off him, flipped to his feet, and dashed forwards, Blade of the Great Hero singing through the air with him. Garana's amazing reach meant he could easily land an attack of opportunity against the boy, but with the increased strength Chesney had been given, he wasn't knocked off course. It still hurt him, but that didn't matter. His sword crashed down across Garana's chest, and a great spray of blood shot forth. The wound was deep enough to see bone, and rivulets of blood rushed down the hulking man's chest like a waterfall.
Ha! 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 Much better, but not enough, boy. But I think playtime is officially over. I wanted to watch your soul burn for my army, but I think I'll settle for watching your face as I choke the life out of you.
Garana's whip-like hands were around his throat in an instant, and he ripped off Cormu's helm so he could properly watch his victim die. Both ham-sized fists circled his neck, lifted him in the air, and squeezed. Chesney felt like his head was going to pop like a ripe fruit. His windpipe was closed and crushed, and the bones of his neck started to pop and cracken. It was all he could do to hold on to Garana's arms to keep his body from pulling him down, and with Garana's reach, he couldn't even kick hard enough to do anything. His sword slipped from his grip.
Yes. I'm going to pop your little head off like a flower, and then I'm going to take my time with that sweet little poppet of yours, boy. But wait, weren't you going to kill me? Don't you have anything to say?"
Chesney couldn't even manage a tiny squeak, but the hateful glare he leveled at the man said all he needed to say. Then, from behind the hulking figure, was Midia's voice.
"I'll show you a sweet little poppet,"
she yelled, and then swung her staff. Crack! Garana screamed and collapsed to the ground, cradling a knee that was bending the completely wrong way. Chesney fell to the ground, barely able to manage a gasp through his crushed windpipe, as Midia stalked around behind Garana once again, and brought down her staff with such force that could only have been from the strength-enhancing spell. Crack! Another howl, and one of Garana's elbows was shattered.
You vile little bitch. I'll kill you. I swear I'll kill you." No, you won't.
Crack!
You won't hurt anyone, ever again.
Crack! As Chesney gulped down a pill, and his windpipe snapped back into place so he could finally breathe again, Midia shattered Garana's other knee and elbow, leaving him a helpless, gnashing lump. His eyes were filled with murder and rage as his almost foamed at the mouth with his curses and vows, but they could all amount to nothing. At last, she stood by his head, grabbed both sides by the temples, and prepared to deliver the final blast to end him.
"This is too good a death for you, filth." "Wait!"
Chesney coughed and approached.
"You're right. It is too good. Let me."
She looked at him, her heart breaking at the lines on Chesney's neck that still remained from Garana's deadly grip. She dropped to Garana's head, and went to stand by Chesney's side. Garana's vile hatred came out of his mouth like a never-ending stream of nonsense, with no beginning or end.
"Vile rats, wretched traitors, you think Cormu's things will save you. You'll die. You'll all be crushed like bugs when his greatness avenges me. Worms, wriggling in filth, worthless."
Chesney looked down at the helpless villain with nothing but contempt. He extended a single finger, and fire engulfed Garana's body. He kept it low and slow, and held it for as long as it took for the body to catch fire naturally. While Garana screamed and thrashed and burned and died, they ran to Joyce. She was unmoving, and they hadn't seen during the fight when she had stopped. The strange, oral fire that engulfed her and siphoned away her life energy was gone now. All the spectral forms flashed and burst and blew away, while the sky turned from crimson to the natural colors of early dawn. She was almost skeletally thin, and they both wept to see her vibrant face transformed into this haggard wraith of a person. Using the incredible strength the magic afforded them, they were able to pull free the cruelly long nails that affixed her to the Y-shaped scaffold, and lay her down on a bed of cloaks, which they wrapped her with then.
It's okay, Joyce, we've got you. We'll fix you right up,
Medea said, her voice shaking from panic. She pushed everything she had left into the woman. It did absolutely nothing. Her heart sank in horror.
No. 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 This has to work. It has to.
Her voice shrill. She did it again, and again, until her every iota of mental energy was spent, and then they tried their strongest medicines. Nothing worked. Chetsney shook his head, covering his eyes, unwilling to see how powerless they were, not letting himself acknowledge this cruel reality.
Please, not like this.
Joyce's breathing was weak and wet, rattling in her chest.
Shh! Shh! It's okay. It's all my fault.
Her voice was like a half-heard whisper on the wind. It was so faint. They both knelt close, their tears falling on her face, trying to listen.
No, no, it's not. Don't say that. Please. Joyce. Please, you can't die.
Medea sobbed. After her earlier breakdown after the tower, she had felt like she had cried every tear she would ever cry again for the rest of her life. But for this, her body found more. Joyce kept speaking, every gasping breath sounding like her last. After every few words she would deflate and slow even more.
I should never have introduced you to him. Should have just taken you east myself. So sorry. South, southeast, the tundra, resistance camp.
The two children couldn't even speak through their grief, but nodded.
If you go, so much,
Her chest could barely rise any longer, and for a moment they thought she had passed. But after one last shudder, she said only,
I'm sorry,
and went still. Medea sobbed louder, and collapsed to the ground, face in her hands.
I can't do it anymore. I can't live like this. When is it going to stop? Please. I just want it to stop.
Ched's knee fell apart then, falling to his knees and crying out in wordless, formless mourning. He had no comforting words for her. He had none for himself. He was spent, beyond spent, thin, and stretched, and like a smear upon the world. If someone, anyone, walked by just then intent on his death, he would have let them in. In that state of fugue, his thoughts were sluggish and wandering. It took him a long moment to understand the subtle absence his subconscious noticed, but couldn't communicate. When he finally understood, he said,
Bean.
Simply, quietly.
Where is he?
The reminder sent a fresh wave of guilt through Medea's mind.
Oh, Sophie, forgive me. I used him. After everything, I used him to save you.
She looked over to the spot where he fell, and he saw.
Let's try,
he said, his voice dusty and weak. Mournfully, she rose. Like a wraith herself, she staggered half-dead towards the clumps of shadow that fizzed in the pre-dawn light. Automatically, she knelt, covered her hand over, and reached for the crown's power. Though she felt like a thief and a fraud for asking for the power after what she had done, it once more heeded her call, and a trickle of healing force entered the specter's shapeless mass. It worked. His pale, translucent form shimmered back to corporeality. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it tasted so bitter. Why could the healing force bring back this ancient, dead thing? But for Joyce, it was powerless? It didn't seem fair. It felt wrong, like a joke gone too far and like fate reveled in twisting the knife in their most tender wounds.
Why?
She whispered, hurt and bitterness in her voice. Chesney had no answer. He numbly knelt down and gave him a pill, and the being solidified further, and stirred. Bean seemed especially distant and quiet, and not altogether as coherent as he had been. Each slow, ponderous movement the ghost made was tremulous and unsure. Much about him had been lost, and it was not clear if it would return. They stood together, a trio of ghosts, silent, and in pain. After the sky had turned from pinkish orange to yellow, Medea said in a monotone voice,
"We should prepare her a grave, with our own hands. I don't want to cheapen it with our magic. It couldn't save her. Yeah, I'm with you."
They spent the morning clearing away debris, finding tools, and set to work. The few inhabitants of Karen eventually came out to see what the night had done, but the pair of them would not accept their aid, beyond one offering a great flat stone to serve as marker, which they accepted. Chesney focused on digging, while Medea gouged letters into the flat rock. Once afternoon had truly arrived, all was said and done. They had found a quiet corner of Karen to lay her down to rest, and carved out a message on the tombstone to mark her. "Here lies Joyce, a baker's daughter. Her bread gave peace, rest, and the power to fight, for freedom's sake." Dark bags hung from Medea's eyes. The vitality of her was just gone, and gray.
"Okay, that's all I have left in me. I can't stay here 1 second longer. Not 1 second.
They were alone now. Bean had wandered off some time between glances, like he was in search of his missing pieces. They both hoped that he could find them. Chesney looked at his reflection in the visor of Cormu's helm. The bruise around his neck and burst blood vessels in his eyes hadn't been fully healed, but frankly at the moment, he didn't care. He dutifully put the helmet on. They turned, and left Karen behind. The day was the coldest yet, and as they went east, they knew it would only get colder. The wind was picking up too, and the dark clouds that seemed to hover over the eastern mountains like an angry swarm grew tall and wide and swelled with unfallen snow. Absently they recalled that neither had eaten that day, but neither asked to stop. The thought of eating made them nauseous, and staying any longer in this cursed land than they needed to was not an option. The cold, deadly wind slipped seemingly effortlessly through their cloaks and fur jackets, and hours into their walk their fingers and toes were stiff and numb. That whole journey, they didn't speak a single word to each other, until Chesney said,
"The rope network station. Let's get out of the wind."
The long sentence felt foreign coming from his mouth. Medea only nodded, and shadowed him as he turned towards the last single mote of civilization left in their journey southeast. The attendant staffing the place was the same as had been before. It was obvious he lived in some back room of the building. He had initially started from surprise when they came to the door, thinking them at first to be ghouls of some kind. As soon as he recognized them as the unaccompanied children from the other day, he waved them inside with clear relief.
"Oh, immortals, you two are okay. I've been sick for days over you two,"
the man said, then rushed all about the place to set up a small fire and some tinned and dried food he could spare them. The pair of them barely spoke, only making small noises of thanks to the kind gestures the attendant offered. At last, when a small fire was just catching, and he had seated himself, he looked them over, his face falling in sympathy when he saw the sorry state they were in.
"What happened to you two out there?"
Words seemed too painfully inadequate to explain it. Even the thought of trying to tell the story made Chesney feel so tired. A minute of stillness and silence passed, and all he said was,
"We lost."
A sad, knowing smile came and passed in a breath on the attendant's face.
"Yeah, that happens out here."
Dumbly the two children took small mouthfuls and ate in silence, and when their already slow pace of eating slowed even further, the attendant set aside the partially eaten food, and spoke to them.
"Please tell me you're ready to get back in a rope network car and get out of here."
There was a pleading tone in his voice that sounded like he'd had this conversation before, and wished desperately that this time it would go differently.
"Can't."
Chesney barely registered that it was Medea who said it.
"Yeah,"
the attendant said, sighing dejectedly and looking into the fire.
That happens around here. Thanks for the food,
she said, and stood. Chesney joined her, and they walked out the door. The attendant followed after them, shouting from the door, shouting into the wind.
Please, at least wait out the storm.
He looked up at the dark swelling clouds that even now were turning the day into darkness. The two children didn't turn, or respond, and continued east.
Damn it,
he said, and cursed to himself.
Gods damn it.
He watched them go, as he had so many others before, and hated himself for never being able to do a damn thing. It should be said that the deadly and haunted landscape had not become safer in the slightest since the ritual had been thwarted. While they had learned to an extent how to avoid the worst ambushes, the dead things of this land were never far away. And thus it was a surprise to find that the closer they got to the frozen snowfields at the foot of the eastern mountains, their foes became somewhat livelier, though no less deadly. The salamander things they had spied so rarely close to Karen were now thickly camouflaged among the accumulating piles of snow and craggy grounds. Chesney and Medea suffered poisonous bites more than a few times each. More than that, though, the cold air carried pained wails and roars from far off in the distance that could have only come from massive animals. Once they happened upon two terror rexes, though slightly darker in shade than the ones they had seen around Barsus, fighting over the still steaming corpse of something that looked like an albino white elepsor. Some time later, as the snow began to fall, and the dunes of snow began to slow their pace, they encountered a mated pair of the tall, sturdy beasts, and had no choice but to slay them to pass. Very quickly after that, the sky filled with a storm of snow, and the distance they could see was reduced to almost nothing. Chesney led them almost to the very feet of the mountains. If there were any caves where the resistance lied hidden within, being so close would be their only chance to spot them.
I never thanked you. Before, I mean.
It was Chesney who spoke first, after many long hours of distance and silence that had hung between them. That gap between them, born their raw hurt and failure, had gnawed at him until the words felt almost pushed out of his mouth. She stepped closer, and cleared her throat to say,
What do you mean? In that tower, at the end, when it almost had me, you jumped in front of me, in front of that thing, and saved me. So much happened since then, and I realized I'd never even thanked you. So thank you, for saving my life. Again. Oh.
She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, and wrapped her arms around herself.
We save each other's lives so often, I didn't even think about it. But of course, you're welcome. And again, when Garana got his hands on me, and was choking the life out of me, you found the strength to take him down all on your own, and saved me. I just wanted to say, I think you're really incredible.
In another time and another day, Medea would have blushed at the compliment and be satisfied giving him an appreciative smile. Right now, though, there was an uneasy feeling that there were unsaid things behind Chesney's words that gave her pause.
I hope you're including yourself in that assessment too, Chesney. That would be a little self-centered. Maybe. But why did it feel like there was a but, followed by something else in your head?
Chesney made an annoyed sound. He felt trapped, and didn't want to lie. Not answering would have given up the truth of it, just as surely as answering honestly.
You're a little too good at this. Well, I have to be, with you. You keep so much bottled up. So come on, tell me what's bothering you. I keep being reminded that I'm mine, not enough, and every time, I feel like I'm setting us up for bigger and bigger falls. And then, when the time comes to do what we've been journeying all this time to do, I won't even stand a chance. I'm so worried, because it all depends on me, and this sword, and there's just no way I can do it.
They walked on in silence as she considered a response. His true worries always seemed so foreign when compared to the version of him she saw. He always glossed over his bravery and determination, and selflessness, and could only ever dwell on his failures. How could he feel his strength was so fragile, when every step in this long journey was won through his unwavering drive to what needed to be done, no matter what the cost to himself? More importantly, though, what could she say to him to make him see that? Or to stop putting all the pressure on himself and let himself breathe?
Maybe. Maybe you will fail. Maybe we both will. Maybe this all started too soon, and we are just too weak to stop it. We're only 13. We're still just kids. And do you know what all that means?
He shook his head, giving her a genuinely confused look.
It means that the world failed to stop it, not US, not you. This isn't just our responsibility, Chesney. It's the result of 10,000 years of mistakes that millions of people made, that nobody stopped this all from happening. If Zagos had been stopped before he rose to power, if the North and South had brokered peace, if the North had united against the growing threat of Sasquatch, instead of ignoring the problem, if the tower had been destroyed, if we had been told who we were when we were born, damnation, if Sophie, Cormu, and Gabnid had taken all their technology with them, none of this would be happening now. This isn't our fight, Chesney. We're just the only ones who are left who can still stop it. So, if we can't do it, then that's just how it is.
She slowed her steps, pulled him near, and took off his helmet. She wanted to truly convey this next part with nothing to obscure the message. She had to get through to him.
And there's one more thing I want to say. How much do you trust me? I trust you completely, Midia, you know what? And do you believe in me? Do you trust my advice, my opinions, my experience? Yes, of course I do. How could I not? You've saved us so many times, seen so much I've missed. I depend on you. And, do you think I could ever lie to you? That I could look you in the eyes like I'm doing right now, and lie? And that if I tried, that you wouldn't be able to tell?
His features fell to confusion.
I don't understand what you're trying to say to me, Midia. Just answer me. Do you believe I could ever lie to you?
His eyes searched hers, trying to understand what she was trying to build towards. At last he said,
If I had to say, then no. I don't think you could. No. No. You'd never lie to me. Then, please listen to what I have to say. Believe that I can see things from an outside perspective, and trust that what I say is the truth. I've watched you grow before my eyes from the first moment I met you. I've been there to see all your victories and defeat. Chesney, you have never, ever, ever given up. I've seen the power and reach of our enemies that stand before us, and where so many others would have fallen against them, you have endured and won. I've been witness to your courage time and again, and I know how deep inside you ache and hurt, and just want to stop and give up and give in. And every day you fight that feeling and move forward again. So listen to me, right now. Me, who has been here beside you for all of it. Who knows you better than anyone?
She grabbed his shoulders, and gazed deep enough into his eyes that she hoped she could ram the next words into his mind, so deep he would never forget them.
You will do it, Chesney. Not can, not could, not might. I feel it, I know it, right to my core. There is not one mote of doubt in me, about you. You will do it. You say you believe in me, and trust me. Then tell me you believe me now.
The complex storm of emotions fighting inside him in that moment was impossible to describe. All his doubts were whispering darkly to him how she was a fool, how she was forgetting all his failures, refusing to see his weakness, refusing to acknowledge the impossibility of the task before them. But he could also see that dear, hopeful plea in her eyes that refused to look away from his, eyes that forced him to confront the sincerity of her feelings. His doubts were replaced, one by one, with her trust and affirmation.
Okay, Midia, you win. If you believe in me, then I can believe in me, too.
She nodded, satisfied, and released him. before she could walk off, though he had one thing left to say.
There's something I have to ask. What made you leap in front of it like you did? Yes, you destroyed it with that incredible attack, but if it had failed, we'd both be dead.
Her look turned contemplative.
I don't know. There was no plan. It was all just instinct. I don't know, refused to let it happen. Like when we fought for Daphne, and I hit you with that final blow that should have taken you down, but you just didn't. You got back up. And do you remember what you said when I asked you why you had done something so dangerous to your body?
He tried to remember. He recalled that feeling in the moment. Imagine seeing her there, broken, depending on him to save her, with his foe right in front of him, and just having taken a bone-shattering blow. And in that moment, he didn't matter, and he would push himself to save her. He nodded.
Point taken. Good. But let's try not to make it a habit, because I've never been more scared in my whole life.
He decided to try something.
Okay, be honest. Was it really because I was about to die, or was it actually just because it was a super scary ghost?
She laughed, for the first time in a very long time, and it filled his heart with warmth to see her face lit up like that.
Okay, you got me. We both know what the answer to that question is.
Now that things had seemed to ease between them, they walked on a little closer together. Medea took the time to congratulate Chesney's judgment on bringing Bean along, and she went on a bit of a tangent, trying to consider reasons why the crown and the pills were able to heal him. While they were in the middle of a discussion on the matter, Chesney stopped and motioned for silence. She followed his lead.
Do you feel that?
She paused to feel, and was about to shake her head, when she felt a slight tremble through the ground. Immediately her thoughts went to the mountains.
Oh, death and oblivion. Is it an avalanche?
She whispered, backing away from the mountain instinctually. In the quietest whisper, he said,
No.
Shaking his head, then looking all about him as though there was something he was expecting to see. The blizzard made it impossible to see anything more than a few dozen yards away, and most of what they could see was all pure white with shades of gray.
There's a rhythm to it. Do you feel that?
In time, she did, and she had a terrible feeling she knew what it was. A feeling which was confirmed when, a moment later, a great roar cut through the silence of the country. The roar came from the direction they had been walking.
That thing we never saw in the forest.
She whispered harshly.
Didn't Bean say it usually made its home all the way out here?
A second later, there was a flash of brilliance that seemed to illuminate the silhouettes of two huge forms off in the distance, and then a high-pitched squeal, and more stomping. The smaller of the two broke away, and ran off in their direction, the larger thundering after it, with another great roar. Chesney backed away, tugging at Medea's sleeve.
I think we're about to find out. Run!
The snow was so thick and fresh that their way was painfully slow in contrast to their fear. The blowing winds of the storm, and the thick flakes of snow it brought didn't help matters either. Out of the blowing snow, they saw one of the darker purple terror rexes running at full tilt, right alongside them, though paying them no heed. There were two great bloody gashes along its neck, and one whole side of its long body was a smoking, smoldering ruin.
What in the world?
He shouted, completely at a loss for what could have possibly done that to the creature. Then he saw it, plowing into view through the storm like nothing in the world could stop it. For a moment it felt like he was seeing Kamat again, and his heart skipped a beat thinking that the terrible monster had tracked them down to stop their journey here and now. If it wasn't a dragon, though, it was as close as anything could get to it. It was finally clear how something as huge and deadly as a terror Rex could be so afraid of anything. This new creature was massive, with jaws that looked like they could snap the spine of a Rex in half with one bite. Built like a terror Rex, only bulkier, and with a thick frill of flesh-covered horns all around the top of its head. All along its spine was a collection of sharp, bony blades. The coloration was vibrant crimson red on top, and shiny reflective silver on the bottom. Every single scale looked hard as a gemstone. But most terrifying of all was its eyes. They were intelligent, evilly intelligent. Bright, neon yellow, with long black slits for pupils. It spotted them both as it made chase, and it was clear that when it was done chasing down its prey, they were next.
Media, speed us up. Speed us up now,
he cried when he locked eyes with the thing. How anything that enormous could live, and find enough to eat in this barren wasteland was beyond him, but it was undoubtedly the absolute king of any ecosystem it called home. Perhaps if they'd know what to expect and prepared, they might have had a chance. With help. Right now all he could think of was to run and hope they could escape. Media didn't need to be told twice. She applied the magic to them both, and they were off like arrows. Now rather than being overtaken quickly by the two enormous lizards, they merely kept pace with them, perhaps the barest hint faster.
Duke the Rex off. Maybe that huge thing will chase it.
Media offered.
Okay, but you should increase our strength. I think we'll need it,
he said, then tried to aim a blast of fire right at the Rex's head to make it break course with them. He didn't need to hurt it, only spook it. It worked, and the Rex started in surprise, and swerved off from their own path. Unfortunately, the massive dragon-like creature did not take kindly to their interference. It roared in rage, and opened its great jaws. A light built within, and a near-deafening whine built in pitch and intensity along with it. A second later, an intense focused beam of light and fire blasted from its throat, and carved a path through the snow, turning it instantly to steam. The beam at first shot between the running children and the Rex. It seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a moment, but then the head turned towards the Rex, and its flesh engulfed in flames, and was boiled away to the muscle. It fell, screaming, into the snow, and moved no more. The beam was spent, and the fire-soar, as Chesney just then determined to call it, roared in triumph. Then it locked its gaze on the children. At that point, Media had given them both the magic that boosts their strength.
Okay, is there a plan? I can't run forever,
she said through deep breaths. Survive, he thought to himself darkly. It seemed too insensitive to say out loud, though.
Okay, on 3, we split. Then we improvise.
On the third count, they both ran perpendicular to their previous path. The fire-soar seemed to hesitate and slow its pace for just a moment, considering which of them to follow. Chesney made the decision for it.
Over here, you big, dumb lizard,
he yelled as loud as he could, then punctuated his message with a break spell aimed for its head. The wave of distortion hit like a punch to the face, knocking its head back. It roared and slid to change its direction, aiming straight for him with murder at its eyes. Chesney intentionally slowed his pace, letting himself catch his breath a little, and allowing the monster to close the distance. If I can get over it, or under it, I can do some real damage, he thought. Right when the time seemed right, he prepared to stop completely and run towards it. He hadn't counted on the monster leaping through the air in a surprise pounce, its tiny arms keeping it balanced as its powerful hind legs came at him, ready to crush him. They missed each other by inches, and the tremendous force of the monster hitting the ground sent Chesney rolling through the snow. By the time he'd gotten to his feet, the fire-soar was already turned and baring its jaws to eat him. In that moment, an arrow buried itself into the thing's snout, followed moments later by a bolt of lightning at the exact same spot. The creature balked and leapt back in pain. Thanks, Media, he thought, until the fire-soar turned, snarling towards her now. Needing to keep its attention on him, he sprinted past the head, leapt through the air and drove his sword in the middle one of the great hind legs, intent on using his sword as a handhold to climb to its back. It squealed and whipped around to see, then tried to shake him off. It didn't work, so instead, it made to fall off to the side in order to crush him.
Oh crap,
he yelled, and pulled hard to free the sword. He was able to leap away, but wasn't able to brace himself against the fall at all, and had the wind knocked out of him. This isn't going well, he cursed to himself. Meanwhile, The Firesaur got up and stood over Chesney, daring Midia with its posture to come and save him if she dared. She dared indeed. As she ran forward, she charged up a powerful bolt and unleashed it not at its head, but its other leg. The shock made its leg jerk uncontrollably, and it fell the opposite direction, which gave Chesney the chance to stand. He wasted no time finding the monster's underbelly and stabbing Cormu's sword right through. The great hind legs scrabbled at him and kicked him away, sending him flying a dozen body lengths away, before it deftly stood up again. Midia then blasted the monster with a blast of break, snapping back its head. It roared, its hateful yellow eyes boiling with rage, and charged her. Before she could even think of how to dodge, it spun and swiped her with a tail as thick as a small house. She, her bow, and staff were all knocked through the air and scattered into the drifts of snow. She landed heavily in a deep drift. Now getting fed up, the Firesaur stood still and made to start building its fire and light beam, watching them both recover and obviously deciding which to destroy first. The air filled with a high-pitched whistle as it built in strength and aimed for Midia.
I can't get unstuck,
Midia screamed, still trying to get herself out of the packed snow and dirt she had been thrown into. Her increased strength was useless in her awkward position. The noise got louder, and the light in the Firesaur's throat grew more intense, and she could only scream in wordless panic as she tried to push the heavy snow off of her. But she knew she wasn't going to make it in time. It stamped twice, to steady itself and dig its talons into the ground, and fired. She screamed and closed her eyes. Everything was light and heat. Steam boiled around her, but not her body. She opened her eyes and saw Chesney braced with his shield in front of them both. While Cormu's things took the damage in stride, the shield wasn't so lucky. Flames blasted at them like a tidal wave, and the shield's edges were glowing red, melting, and flaking away. The shield wasn't enough to cover him, though, and he screamed more than she had ever heard him do before. His joints were unprotected. While the flame couldn't directly touch his body through the armor, the heat had no problems. All around them, snow was being melted into steaming puddles. Midia was finally able to push herself out of the drift, and she pressed her hands against him, both to prop him up against the attack, and to try to heal him before he was burned alive. Her hand involuntarily jumped back at the intense, painful heat of his armor, but she forced her hand back on, and pumped as much healing energy into the connection as she could. It was like intentionally pressing her hand into a hot pan, but she endured, not wanting to imagine the terrible pain Chesney was enduring for both their sake. At last the terrible beam of fire and light stopped. The monster huffed several great breaths, obviously drained. Chesney just trembled, unable to move, unwilling even to speak. He had survived, but Midia couldn't even fathom the internal damage he'd just taken. She took a pill from his belt, and gave it to him. He cried in relief, and even let out a single sob. Her heart broke at what he had done for her.
Oh, Chesney, I'm so sorry.
His shield was basically gone, and he dropped what remained of it off his arm. After a few shallow breaths, followed by a long one, he shook his head. He stammered,
I don't know if I can. If I can do that again.
He finally moved, and shakily squared up for a charge.
We need to force an opening or we'll be dead in a few minutes. Follow my lead. What can we do?
She asked, holding up her hands.
My weapons are missing.
He explained his idea. She breathed out a shaky breath.
Do you remember what Daphne told May after that fight? That I have lost if you had done the smart thing. Apply that to this thing. This is really risky. I know, but I just know it will work. Please, trust me. You know I do. I'm with you.
He nodded, and they both bolted forward towards the Firesaur. It had been sluggishly regaining itself after the attack, but snapped to attention when they started charging.
Piss it off,
he ordered, and Midia let loose another bolt aimed at the monster's snout. It snarled, and dug in its talons. Just as it was starting its own charge, Chesney blasted it with another bolt. It snarled again, even angrier, and charged at them, shoulders bunched up like it was ready to lunge for them with its jaws.
"Wait for it,"
he ordered, the distance closing fast. Medea wanted to ask what they should do if things turned sideways, but there was just no time. They were committed, for better or worse. Their hands locked together, ready. Just as they hoped, the firesaur lunged straight at them with jaws wide open, head low. At the moment the lunge happened, they both leapt as high as their enhanced strength could take them, just making it over the wide-open jaws. Together, they brought down their feet in a combined heel kick, right onto the bridge of the snout between the eyes. The force of it was devastating. As though struck by a boulder, the firesaur's head slammed down into the dirt and snow with a crack. Using the momentum from the kick, they were both launched over the crown of horns. Chesney landed all right and plunged his sword hilt deep into the flesh of the neck along the spine. But Medea was carried slightly off course, just missed some of the spikes along the neck, and bounced off, and onto the ground.
"Don't worry about me. Do it. Hurry,"
she yelled. He nodded, grabbed the sword's hilt in both hands, and braced his feet on two of the bony protrusions, pulling with everything he had. He was trying to pull the sword through the rest of the neck, severing the spine. For any other blade, it would have been impossible, but he put all his trust into the insanely sharp blade. Blood sprayed as he wrenched on the stuck sword. He'd obviously done some real damage, but it still wasn't enough by the time the firesaur regained its footing. It writhed and bucked to dislodge him, but nothing the monster could do would reach him where he was. So, it focused on Medea instead. It leaned to one side and kicked her with a hind leg, one of its talons impaling her leg and hooking her, making it so she tore a deadly gash in her leg as she was flung away. Chesney, his heart rending in two at seeing the spray of blood from his partner, redoubled his efforts to cut through the neck, but it was like trying to cut through a boulder just by pushing your sword at it.
"I can't get any further,"
he growled through his teeth, red-faced and straining with everything he had.
"You have to. You have to."
Medea had landed half a dozen body lengths away, blood leaking out of her at a truly alarming rate, and completely unconscious. The beast crowed its victory to the sky, and made to devour her. Chesney screamed, in rage, in terror, in desperation, in absolute rejection of reality, and pushed as much of his life into a spell as he could give it. The spell to reduce defenses. It seeped down into the core of the firesaur instantly, tearing and teasing the bonds that kept it together on a molecular level. He felt the sword snap through something, catch, then like a shot pulled through the rest in a sickening crunch. Like dropping a bag of pudding filled with sticks, the beast collapsed and rolled to the ground, throwing Chesney free before he was crushed. As soon as he was on his feet, he tossed his bloody sword and helmet aside and ran to Medea, faster than he had ever run before. Blood was still pouring out of her in every weakening spurts. For a few heartbeats he panicked, not knowing what to do. He tried pushing on the wound to slow the bleeding, but it was too big and his hands weren't enough. Not only that, but it made it so he couldn't grab his belt. Out of ideas, he instead knelt against the wound and scrambled for the bottle at his belt with hot, sticky fingers. Like a clumsy fool, a number of them slipped through his fingers, but he held on tightly to one, shoving it at her mouth and leaving a bloody handprint over her ghost-pale face. Her leg began to knit itself back together, and so he jumped away, not wanting to know what would happen if his knee was still there when it sealed. When it did, she still did not wake, but her color had returned. He knelt down, and hauled her against him to prop her up and for warmth. He shook the last pill out into his hand, and pushed it between her lips, rocking her and feeling his panic rise.
"Please, please, please,"
he whispered, voice cracking. He tried not to look at just how much of the blood in the snow was hers.
"Don't leave me alone out here, please."
When she at last said,
"So cold,"
he could have leapt for joy, but instead he used a spell he had not yet used, a spell of fire and sky together, and piled on the power. Heat. For as far he could see, like a shock wave originating at them both. Every remaining bit of snow simply evaporated out of the air and melted into lukewarm water on the ground.
It's okay. It's okay. I've got you. I've got you.
He whispered to her as she shivered in his arms.
Did we get it?
When she said it, he laughed in relief, almost giddy.
Yeah, we got it. Can we stay like this for just a little bit? Of course, dummy. As long as you need.
She closed her eyes, and he stayed there, rocking her gently, for a long, very long time. It didn't matter how hot he got, or tired, or how he couldn't feel his legs in the awkward position he was in. As long as she was alive, she could rest like this as much as she wanted. Then, suddenly, footsteps to the side, and Chesney snapped his head to look.
Holy smokes, kid! What in the world was all that?
It was a Doru man, ears so long they were above his head, wearing resistance fatigues, and looking truly incredulous.
Here I am just making sure nobody is sneaking around out here under the cover of the storm, and I see that huge bastard start freaking out, and I have no idea what to think. And then I see it's chasing people. No, not just people. Bloody kids. I mean, what in blazes were you two even doing out here? In the middle of a snowstorm. And then, that.
Midia, hearing the commotion, wakes up, and yelps in surprise at seeing the unfamiliar man standing nearby. Standing between them and the discarded Cormu's sword.
Who are you?
She asks, as Chesney helps her to her feet.
Whoa, hold on now. Let's all just calm down a sec. See? I see something crazy way out here where nobody has any reason to be, and it makes me wonder. Makes me a bit antsy. Two kids in trouble. Who wouldn't put aside all their worries and help him? But me? Makes me even more suspicious. So, really, I need to hear some answers, you two. Because the only reason I can think of for a couple of kids to be out here doing a big song and dance like that is some big trick from Zago.
Chesney dug out the letter from Grunt, trying to not get so much blood on it. By now most of it had dried. He held it out, though making sure to stay between the strange man and Midia.
Grunt sent us.
The Doru's eyebrows shot up.
Grunt, huh? Well, that guy's about as trustworthy as they come. I warn ya. Though, I can read these letters. He ain't gonna fool me just by having a letter you swipe.
He took the letter, and read it while keeping a wary eye on them. When he finished, he smiled, genuinely. While handing back the letter, he said,
Well, I'll be a son of a slimy salamander. You two are freaking legit. Some right scary little bastards, aren't ya? Come on, let's get out of this storm, and somewhere safe. You two earned it. And I got, hear the story of how you ended up all the way out here.
They looked at each other, giving questioning glances. Quietly, Midia said,
Don't ask me. I'm all out of fight, Chesney. I'm just barely on my feet here. What do you think?
It took him no time to say.
It can't be worse than here.
She nodded, and smiled wanly.
You said it. Let me help,
the man said, while he supported Midia under the shoulder, alongside Chesney. He led them towards a set of low mountains.
Welp, welcome back to the Resistance, kiddos. You're lucky. Today, I wasn't cooking.
They followed him, eager for the promise of food, company, help, and above all, rest.